Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave, and this week it's the Hollywood Studios Year by Year, 20th Century Fox, 1937. We'll be talking about Charlie Chan at the Olympics and Wake Up and Live. But before we dive into those two bold choices for this studio, let's look at Joel W. Findler's list of contract players at Fox in 1937. And Findler has a three-tiered star system here. Actually four, because there's a possibility of no stars. And we actually begin with Victor McLaglen. 0 stars.
I don't get it.
Well, he had been a 2-star, so second-tier star.
Couldn't you just remove him rather than put him there with no stars?
They like a little continuity here, so they show in the late 20s and early 30s.
They want to show his fall.
He was a 2-star figure.
His fall from 2 stars.
That's right, and then he went off to Paramount, where he appeared in Dishonored, notably. Came back and just supported Shirley Temple and got no stars.
But what do you say? 3 is the best.
3 is the best, yeah.
Oh, well.
Then we've got 1 star, Warner Baxter. We've seen him already in several movies. I'm a big fan of Warner Baxter's. We have Alice Faye, 3 stars and well-deserved. Loretta Young, 2 stars. Shirley Temple, 3 stars to the max. Obviously, she was the #1 box office attraction.
I think she deserves an extra star.
If anyone does, in terms of appeal at the box office, she does. I'm not a fan of Shirley Temple, but America disagreed in the 1930s.
A little bit sick, considering you're a 48-year-old man.
I'm not 48 yet.
How old are you?
47.
You're still 40? We're both 47? Oh, wait, I'm 46.
Oh, boy. Sonia Haney.
At this age, you stop counting.
Sonia Haney robbed, given only 2 stars. In my book, she is a top-tier talent. Don Amici, 2 stars, also top tier for me. And Tyrone Power, deservedly 3 stars. He was the face of 20th Century Fox from the mid-1930s to the mid-1950s.
However, there's a glaring omission here.
Warner Oland.
Warner Oland is going to drop dead the next year, putting an end to his Charlie Chan run of B-movies. But in my research, I did come across the opinion that those movies kept Fox afloat during the Depression.
Yeah, and we're still in the Depression in 1937. In fact, we're entering the second Depression, basically. Things took a downturn in 1937 again. Charlie Chan would have been there to help cheer people up. These movies, they didn't cost a lot to make, I don't think. That's true, but they certainly brought in a lot of money.
Do you know who else loved the Charlie Chan movies, Dave? Not just the Americans, but
Who?
the Chinese and the Chinese expatriates.
Okay, well that needs some explaining because as we know, probably as you know in the audience, Charlie Chan is not played by a Chinese man. He is played by Warner Oland, a Swedish man.
So this was not only appealing to white people at the time, this was quite a break in terms of archetypes, stereotypes, whatever you want to call it, from previous representations in Hollywood films, including those by Warner Oland himself in the Fu Manchu movies. A series of detective novels featuring Charlie Chan by Earl Dare Biggers. They were conceived as an antidote to this stereotype, this sinister Oriental stereotype.
So noble in intention, at the very least.
And they were loosely based on a real person who came across the radar of Earl Dare Biggers after he vacationed in Honolulu.
So he had Honolulu on the brain, he started reading up on it.
And this fellow was by the name of Chang Apana, who was a member of the Honolulu Police Department, starting in 1898, but was put on the Chinatown beat. So more like Jack Nicholson than like Charlie Chan, really. The sorts of things he got up to, based on his Wikipedia entry, again, does not seem to have a whole heck of a lot to do with what we see in this film in any case.
Well, no, our Charlie Chan in the films is a globe-trotting crime solver.
In this Wikipedia entry, I did come across, in the further reading section, an interesting-looking book called Charlie Chan, The Untold Story of the Honorable Detective and His Rendezvous with American History by, and I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce this, Wanti Huang. According to a bad review given to it on Google Books here. There's actually not a whole lot in it about the real life Charlie Chan, or in any case, there's more in it about the, and I quote, rampant abuse of non-white people and racism that was allowed to run amok throughout Hawaii.
And the person commenting doesn't want to hear about that? Is
No,
that what you're saying?
They wanted to hear more about Chang Apana.
Okay, well, it sounds like an interesting work of cultural history, and we know that things were not good in American colonies, which is what Hawaii was, basically a protectorate at the time.
But you wouldn't know any of this from Charlie Chan at the Olympics, nor that these were in fact the Nazi Olympics.
Right, we're going to talk about that, but first I'm going to read a passage. So this is from The Films of 20th Century Fox by Tony Thomas and Aubrey Solomon, our little write-up, and I mean little in this case. Using footage of the Olympic Games in Berlin in 1936, this edition finds Chan chasing spies in order to regain an invention which will allow for remote control flying of aircraft. Tracing them to Berlin, Chan cooperates with the German police to nab the culprits. Number One's son, played by Key Luke, is a member of the U.S. swimming team and survives a kidnapping. Succinct as hell right there, and no comment on the quality of the film.
Well, I don't know how much comment needs to be made about that. It's a competently made film by a director you love.
Bruce Humberstone, Bruce Humberstone.
What are some of the highlights of Humberstone for you, Dave?
He was entrusted with some big films in the 40s, and I think a real milestone for him. He did a bunch of the Charlie Chan movies, I think, but then I Wake Up Screaming. That's an amazing proto-noir from 1941 with Betty Grable, Carol Landis, Victor Mature, Alicia Cook Jr. is a real weirdo.
Oh, well, that is astonishing news, Dave.
And Laird Krieger as an even weirder weirdo.
Again.
We'll be watching that.
Casting against type.
In the Hollywood studios year by year later on. Then he did Sun Valley Serenade, an amazing Sonia Haney, John Payne film with the Glenn Miller Orchestra. And he did Hello Frisco Hello, one of the best of the Alice Faye movies later on.
This taciturn synopsis that you read from the Fox book, I guess the only way to flesh it out really would be to engage in some sort of cultural studies type analysis, which I guess our authors were not prepared to do at the time of writing, or perhaps ever.
No, but we will proceed to do it.
Yeah, irresponsibly, like the subtitle says.
Right now. So it really is a film that divides neatly into two halves. Because we start out in Honolulu, we see Charlie Chan in his element, his usual milieu of the Honolulu police station, I guess.
Well, I'm sure they have more than one station.
The big one that Charlie Chan works at. We see him palling around with number 2's son, Charlie Jr.
Yes.
They have their own sort of nuclear family activities. They're planning to go fishing. We actually see them go on their trip. There's a lot of preparation made for that. But while all of that is being discussed, there's also a military trial of a drone plane.
And there's a proleptic physical exam going on as well of Warner Oland.
Yes, and that was very sad for me, knowing that our friend Warner is going to die very soon. But here he's given a clean bill of health, and they tell him to come back next year.
Bronchial pneumonia, worsened by emphysema from years of heavy cigarette smoking.
Oh, terrible.
This is what brought about the end of Warner Oland.
Well, he was a big actor for Fox throughout this period, and his important roles go back before Charlie Chan as well. He did become known, unfortunately, for this kind of impersonation. We've seen him on this podcast.
Yes, but it's better that I guess he ended up in this series than continuing to make the Fu Manchus.
Yeah.
Better legacy.
He did make some Fu Manchu movies. He was the evil general in Shanghai Express.
Although he was also, I think, also a general of some kind in Dishonored, not playing Chinese in that one, and he gets a really great scene with Marlene Dietrich as she defeats him and he must commit suicide.
Yeah, well there he's just a pathetic figure, a traitor who kills himself.
Sure, but it's a great scene the two of them have together.
I agree.
He does really well in that. He does good Strindberg.
And he plays a really monstrous figure in Mandalay, tormenting Kay Francis. So he did that a lot, but yes, it's true. Here, for the last few years of his life, he's playing a very sunny figure.
So what does this positive stereotype, what does this consist of?
Well, he's the smartest man in the film by far.
Oh yeah, he's a Sherlock Holmes type, a B-movie Sherlock Holmes type, doing all the deductions, picking up on all of the clues other people miss.
Unlike Sherlock Holmes, however, he is a genial family man as well.
No, but I meant more in terms of how is a white audience-friendly Chinese person being portrayed. So he is speaking in movie broken English.
I wouldn't even call it broken English.
Well, yeah, he has an amazing vocabulary, but has not mastered grammar, which, also considering that he's brilliant, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Makes you wonder if he's doing a sort of Columbo thing.
Yes, I think he's bemusedly switching around the sentence order, Yoda style.
Well, no, I just mean trying to disarm people.
Sure.
By presenting himself as more innocuous than he is, but it doesn't work at all because everybody thinks he's a genius.
Well, his fame precedes him, but maybe they are a little bit disarmed by the fact that he speaks so humbly.
Also speaks in many aphorisms.
Yes.
Many aphorisms, some of which I like better than others. So you and I were comparing notes, and we don't necessarily agree on which are the good ones. You really liked that amazingly elaborate circumlocution about opening the envelope to digest the information.
Letter, like banana, must be opened in order to digest its contents.
I thought that was actually an aphorism that was making fun of his aphorism.
Well, I think so.
Oh, that's
of
what
course.
you like about it. All right.
It's not telling you anything.
No, exactly. It's just kind of wasting some screen time.
But it's very enjoyable. Goofing on his son, who wants to know what's in the letter without it being opened yet.
Yes, exactly. And then, speaking of the sons, they are aggressively presented as 110% fully assimilated all-Americans. Again, by their speech patterns.
Yeah, they speak in very up-to-date 1930s slang.
They might as well be Andy Hardy.
Exactly.
What I thought, my stab at what's going on here in terms of narrative archetypes, is that the writers are trying to make the Chinese immigrant just like any white immigrant, I guess. Because this is the sort of thing, you see it in movies all the time of this period.
Sure, it's a common film narrative, a common novel narrative as well.
Where the parent is allowed to be sort of charmingly stuck in his or her old world ways while the child is fully Americanized. Now, that of course has its own discomfort for us now.
Sure, it's all mixed up in the myth of the melting pot and the imperative of the melting pot. You have to become 100% American or else you are suspect.
And you see a nice sort of tension in the older son, who's played by
Luke,
actual Chinese person, Luke.
Both sons are played by Chinese actors, yeah. So there's that, at least, in terms of representation.
And Luke has a pretty major role in this film.
Sure.
He's the second lead, I'd say.
And he goes on to be a star in his own right. He does star in some Mr. Wong movies where he plays a detective with no affectations, that I recall, anyway. And he would be active in films for like 5 decades.
But as I was saying, you see this tension in his character, Lee. For example, when he's doing his own versions of his father's sayings for his friend Betty on the Olympic team. After he says that, he feels impelled to kind of rubber band in the opposite direction and go in the deepest and heartiest voice possible. Or something like that.
Yeah. So getting back to this military exercise, Honolulu is where Pearl Harbor is. Even at the time, people would have known there's a big Navy base, big military base in Honolulu. And it's fitting, it makes sense that there would be this important military tryout for a new kind of plane. Charlie Chan expresses the hope that if they can take humans out of the weapons of war, there will be a much better situation in the world.
See, unlike most of his aphorisms, that one made me actually think but I don't think it would work because if you don't have any kind of civilian stakes in a conflict, I'm not sure, how that would be war.
Even if it's machines fighting machines, eventually the machines that win are going to go in and make life difficult for the people that lose. What you want is no more war, not no more humans fighting
He
wars.
basically seems to be recommending drone war.
Right, exactly. And we've seen where that goes. I guess the outcome that you might get if you mechanize all of it, automate all of the war, and take the human element out of it, then you get that Star Trek episode where some people are quote-unquote killed, right? And they get a notification saying, okay, you're a casualty of the war, the theoretical war that's going on. I don't know if you remember that episode.
No. So what is the point of setting this story at the Olympics?
One big reason for it, Fox Movietone News got footage of the Olympics. I think we have to admit that that's the number one reason.
Did they just put it in every movie, though? Or is it just in Charlie Chan at the Olympics?
Well, we'd have to look into that. But I know that they liked to send Charlie Chan to all kinds of different locales. That's
okay.
a nice strategy for a B series, right? They're putting out so many of these movies.
How are you going to differentiate them?
Yeah, there's a comfort to them being kind of the same, but
right.
You also want a little bit of variation in there so people don't say, well, it seems like the same one we saw last month.
This time Charlie goes here, now he goes there. And you don't get them confused either when you're telling your friends about them.
Certainly, when you take a look at this movie, you wouldn't be able to give them very good marks for their coverage of the Olympics because we don't see any of the things that make this one extremely memorable. The fact that it was hosted by Hitler's Nazi regime.
No, instead you see these picturesque German policemen who seem like they belong to the 19th century.
Yeah, the old Prussian state, which was pretty screwed up as well, but not a Nazi state. They make little cracks about German efficiency. Again, those are cracks that might have been made in the 1890s as well. There's nothing really setting this in its proper time.
And yet the subtext really presses hard at the surface at certain points, such as when we see our integrated Olympic team, which is not a thing that integrated anything that you would be seeing in movies at this time, watching the events in general.
We get a lot of footage of the relay race. However, what we don't get is huge focus on the biggest story of the Olympics. Jesse Owens caused embarrassment to the proponents of the master race, that they were being eclipsed by this black American athlete.
Now, I managed to find, or I just came across an article on the internet. It was on something called, I think, the Arts Desk, a write-up on this Olympics. Well, specifically on the Leni Riefenstahl film.
Right.
That was made of it, in which she did include Jesse Owens. I don't think at that point they could do anything else if they wanted anyone else to see the film.
Yeah, he was the number one story.
Yeah, it had a quote from Jesse Owens in it, which was not sourced, but I liked it anyway, which is that he was not invited to shake hands with Hitler, but he also was not invited to see the president or shake his hand.
Right, well, that's true.
We spotted Theresa Harris, the ubiquitous Theresa Harris, who we've brought up before. She's all over all of the studios for decades.
Yeah, one of her most famous roles is Chico in Babyface. She's got a lot to do in that movie.
Yeah, normally she doesn't. She spent most of her career, which extended from the late 20s to the late 50s, being uncredited. However, you watch a lot of movies from those decades, Hollywood movies from those decades, and you start noticing her turning up everywhere. Here, she's just another happy, healthy, all-American kid.
Yeah.
Cheering, it says here in her filmography that she is Black U.S. team member on sidelines rooting for Jesse Owens, uncredited. So somebody decided to call her that.
Yeah, well, I think we do see Jesse Owens in long shot in the relay race, right? But just not a lot of dwelling on that when you would think they would have.
Right. But she's kind of there instead. That's what I'm talking about, this oddity of the subtext pressing at the surface.
Yeah, and even more important, obviously, is the fact that Charlie Chan's son, Lee, is on the Olympic team, and I gather wins gold in swimming.
Right.
So it is a thoroughly integrated team.
The very odd ending of the film. Father is threatening to paddle him.
If he doesn't win, I'm going to get in there and chase you with the paddle. A little motivation for you, son. fun. But back to this drone test, right? So we're back in Honolulu here.
Wait a minute, we're going back to the beginning again.
Well, I think that it's important to take a little bit of a look at the espionage plot, right? We don't have to look at it too much. They take some care in setting it up because there's an elaborate scheme going on here, and we don't know how much of it is planned and how much of it is just coincidence. The high jumper guy, Ki-Luke's friend, is also a pilot, and he can't make the flight. So he's supposed to be the test pilot for this drone run, and he's going to switch on the robot, as they say. And instead, he begs off. They put another guy in who gets killed, and the plane gets hijacked. And then the person that hijacks it gets killed. So there's a trail of murder. So the stakes are high here. This is not bloodless espionage coup. There's a lot of people getting hurt here. There's a really nasty piece of work behind all of this. And who is it? Is it the pole vaulter?
Is it the lady with the white fox?
Well, certainly number 2 son thinks so. Is it Alan Lane, who is a highly placed military figure who's kind of a ubiquitous figure himself, the white-haired guy with the mustache? Is it the evil C. Henry Gordon, who is glimpsed at his hotel making sinister phone calls? And one person that we don't really suspect, except that he often plays a weasel, is the inventor himself, played by John Eldridge, most famous to me as the husband of Bette Davis in Dangerous, but he turns up in likable roles at times as well. King of the Underworld, which is an interesting Kay Francis movie, and he plays a doctor in that. So he's not always sinister, but here it turns out he is. The woman in the white fox fur, however, is a very notable figure as well, Catherine DeMille. And you looked into her backstory.
Well, I think we've mentioned her before. She was the adopted daughter of Cecil B. DeMille.
Yes, we did see her in Fox 1936. She's in Ramona.
She never seemed to get beyond B-movie roles, though.
No, well, she was in The Crusades, which was a DeMille film, and she has sort of a key, small role in that film. That's certainly not a B-movie, but she never starred in an A picture, as far as I know.
But that's okay, because she ended up marrying Anthony Quinn.
Really?
Although, they go on to say he was not a faithful husband.
Well, you wouldn't expect him to be, would you?
I guess not. They did have 5 children, though, so that perhaps where the rest of her career went.
So she turns up here and there throughout the 30s and 40s, but never in major roles. This may be one of her biggest, right? She's billed second, right after Warner Oland.
She's quite a memorable presence.
Oh yeah, she's a beautiful woman, and she's got a good way about her.
Nice deep voice.
She's not just sinister either, right? She's having some fun on that boat, playing her little tricks. And flirting with the pole vaulter guy, making Betty very angry.
Betty gets angry a lot.
And I really like Betty, too. Although I forget the actress's name. Moore was her last name, wasn't it?
Pauline Moore.
Okay.
B-movie ingenue, I'm going to guess.
Looks like she had a decent career. Hey, she's in The Littlest Hobo in the 50s.
A lot of uncredited near the end there.
Plays Anne Rutledge in Young Mr. Lincoln. We'll look forward to that in 1939. So anyway, this plot, Charlie Chan is going to be the only hope of untangling it because everyone else is hopelessly lost. At a certain point, they, and when I say they, I mean Charlie Chan guides them towards understanding that the handoff of this crucial invention, and back of all of this, you have to keep in mind that this film shares a pretty typical American assumption that drone capabilities in the hands of the US military, no problem. Drone capabilities in the hands of anyone else in the world, big problem.
Yeah, so this movie is just problematic all the way down.
But you wouldn't expect anything else, I don't think, from any kind of espionage film. There's always got to be that assumption. That...
No, not unless it's a complete MacGuffin, like in North by Northwest, where we don't even know what it does or care.
But here we do know what it does, and we can picture what it would accomplish if it was held by the other side. And it's very interesting that we're told the opponents here, the people that are after the invention, it's not the Nazis, which you might have expected.
No, they're totally...
Well, they don't exist in this movie. There's no mention of Nazism. There are no swastikas. There's nothing.
It's true, and the German police officers that we do see, I don't know, seem like they're more interested in eating a hearty meal of sausage and beer than in playing high-stakes military games.
No, and the main police officer that we meet loves Charlie Chan. He doesn't seem to subscribe to the Reich's racial theories.
Quite the alternate universe.
It's not Russia either, which you might have expected, right? Evil commies or something. But it is arms dealers who are known for passing military secrets on to revolutionists. So you do
Maybe it's China.
Maybe, right?
Maybe the revolutionists are in China.
Could be. There was a three-pronged war going on in China at this time. The nationalists fighting the communists, fighting the Japanese.
Yeah, Warner Oland was a revolutionary in Shanghai Express.
He was. We've got to get to the bottom of this. And we're told, now here we're getting back to your question, how do the Olympics come into it? Well, it's a big event. People can come to it from around the world without arousing suspicion, because they might just be there to watch the events and not to trade military secrets. And it just so happens that Charlie Chan's son is going to be there as well.
Now, we don't get any kind of love interest, because obviously they're not going to be doing miscegenation in this movie with everything else going on.
No, unfortunately not.
We could just have another Chinese girl on one of the teams, and that would be that. But
no, Ki-Luke is stuck in the friend zone, trying to help Betty and the pole vaulter guy get together.
Right. So instead we get a sort of father-son love story.
Of course. Well, that's every Charlie Chan movie.
Yeah. And we even get Lee in the damsel in distress position at the end of the movie, needing to be rescued by father.
We do, because it comes to a point where nobody can outsmart Charlie Chan, so they have to get leverage against him some other way, and easiest way is to just grab Ki-Luke, keep him under lock and key, and force Charlie Chan to give in that way. But no, the old man is not giving in. He's got more than enough tricks up his sleeve. And we get the showdown. There are rival gangs, right? There's a lot of plotty stuff in this.
Sure was.
It was nice, crisp spy storytelling. I enjoyed it on that level as well.
Well, the scenes aren't exactly very fleshed out.
Feels right that Charlie Chan's in the middle of this confrontation between two rival gangs of spies, and that's the only way that they get out of it, because there's enough of a delay there that the police can arrive and round everyone up.
Almost like the Maltese Falcon with spies.
A little bit, right? And that's a very popular format, right? Dashiell Hammett, every Dashiell Hammett book is about his detective or his main figure groping around trying to figure out who the important players are in some kind of criminal conspiracy or multiple criminal conspiracies, and then finding a way to get them all to turn on each other so that he can emerge with whatever he wants to get done.
Well, I don't know if Charlie Chan quite gets that far. The plot isn't that highly developed.
No, it's not as great as a Dashiell Hammett story. This is not, Red Harvest.
All people want to see, they don't care about the plot. All they want to see is Charlie Chan doing his mannerisms.
He does not spare us. He gives them everything he's got.
Well, he's very likable, Warner Oland, in this.
I agree. That doesn't
he
excuse
really
the problems with it.
In 1980, production was begun on a comedy film to be called Charlie Chan and the Dragon Lady. However, this is all from Wikipedia as usual. A group calling itself Coalition of Asians to Nix was formed, protesting the fact that non-Chinese actors Peter Ustinov and Angie Dickinson had been cast in the primary roles. So,
well, that's shameful.
Already, by 1980, this was not going to fly anymore.
No, rightly so. I mean, it should not have flown in the 30s either. There was not even a question, unfortunately.
Well, you were saying, when we were discussing this earlier off mic, there was one exception. One Hollywood star who was non-white, and that was Anime Wong.
Yeah, she did star in B movies at this very moment. I can think of some from 1938. So she made it all the way through the 30s. These would have been films of analogous stature to Charlie Chan movies. They could have had, obviously there were people capable of playing the role who were Chinese Americans at the very moment that these movies were made. And
if Warner Oland can do it, I think anybody could do it.
Of course. They just didn't want to make the effort. The only thing you can say in the films and the series' favor is that, Ki-Luke did get some decent opportunities as the son, and that's about as far as you can go in terms of trying to make any kind of claims for it being a modicum of progress. Other than the fact that, yes, if it's this or Fu Manchu, certainly this is a better way to go.
I seemed hard on Warner Oland there for a second, so I decided to look up his background. He had training as a Shakespearean actor.
Oh no, he is a great actor. I'm not taking anything away from him. I think he's tremendously effective.
He translated the plays of August Strindberg. He toured with Nazimova.
Yeah.
He married the playwright and portrait painter Edith Gardner Shern. That's interesting. Maybe this air of cultured brilliance and broad vocabulary that he brings to Charlie Chan, maybe not everybody could do it. Maybe Warner Oland was bringing something special to the role. Who knows?
Yeah, and the Charlie Chan series did go on, right? There were other impersonators of this character, not at Fox. Fox basically let it lapse, I think, when Warner Oland died, but I think it moved on to Monogram. Sidney Toler played him. I like Sidney Toler in other movies, but I have not seen his Charlie Chan. I don't know. I can't imagine that it's the same interpretation. He wasn't known for playing very intellectual characters, Sidney Toler, but I guess he had to be doing something. I mean, he's still a brilliant detective. He has to be.
Well, it would be interesting to see the contrast. Maybe I don't know that we're ever going to do Monogram.
Well, we might, as a special subject,
yeah,
obviously.
You might throw it in there.
Yeah, at least one. And we're not going to do a whole slew of Charlie Chan movies at Monogram, but maybe we'll do a Monogram special subject and pick one of them.
From Nazimova to Charlie Chan. What a curious career Warner Oland had. And we're going to see some more people who had curious careers in our next movie.
Wake Up and Live.
In many ways... Okay, so you've shown me, not for the podcast, but you've shown me quite a few Fox musicals. Fox was a studio that I was very much not familiar with at all, other than a few Jennifer Jones movies prior to this. Well, I guess some of their noirs, but certainly not from the 30s.
Well, I came late to Fox because their movies were not on TV very much in the 1980s
that would be the reason.
When I was a kid. And the reason for that is that we were, both of us, generally watching the Ted Turner collection, which includes RKO, Warner Brothers, and MGM. Fox, you would see occasional showings of their films, the big ones, so like Laura or some Marilyn Monroe movies. Yeah. But you didn't see a whole lot of, the important films that were made at this studio that just didn't quite make that cultural cut because there was no one really pushing for them. Later on, certainly you did get a specialty cable channel devoted to Fox movies. And Fox wasn't too bad at putting out DVDs. So I wound up coming to the Alice Faye movies, which is what we're going to be talking about here, through DVDs. I never saw any on TV. They just weren't there.
I've already become, doing this podcast, a fan of the early 30s Fox movies, but I don't know, the musicals I'm a little iffy about. They don't carry the same charge as musicals that you got to know when you were a child or even a teenager, right?
I get a charge out of them, and again, I didn't see any of them until my 20s. And I thought I wouldn't like them, right? Because they don't have the greatest reputation. They certainly don't have the gravitas of the Fred and Ginger movies.
Well, they have their own thing.
They don't have the backstage magic of the Warner Brothers early 30s movies, and they don't have the prestige of the Freed unit at MGM.
Well, they don't have an Astaire, they don't have Kelly, and they don't have a Minnelli.
No, but they do have Alice Faye, who may be one of the greatest singers who was ever a star of a film. She's right up there with Judy Garland, I think, in terms of skill as a singer.
They also have a very bizarre Technicolor Busby Berkeley film.
Right, and
that might be a sort of masterpiece.
Well, that's a little bit of the continuity, right? And Zanuck was the one behind the Busby Berkeley backstage era. And when he went over to Fox, he wanted, once again, to make musicals an important part of Fox's diet. And what he hit upon was this Technicolor vaudevillian extravaganza with a lot of fun character actors and Alice Faye, some big guys that don't really sing much. And then when Alice Faye leaves, he brings in Betty Grable.
Yeah, who's a real come down from Alice Faye, I would say.
She is, but I find her really fun too. But not as skilled as a musical performer, for sure. Maybe a better dancer, not as great a singer.
Not as much of a personality.
She's pretty different.
But before we get into Alice Faye and the rest of this movie, aren't you going to do your reading?
Yep, let's hear from Tony Thomas and Aubrey Solomon. An excellent satire on radio, Wake Up and Live stars two leading personalities of the day, bandleader Ben Burney and journalist Walter Winchell, both of whom get good publicity from their quote-unquote feud. When another radio star, Alice Faye, who does an advice and inspiration broadcast, helps a mic-shy singer, played by Jack Haley, but with Buddy Clark's singing voice, to success by tricking him into singing with Bernie's orchestra, Winchell uses it to expose Bernie as a trickster. But the singer becomes a great hit with the public, gains confidence, and falls in love with the star who has helped him. And Bernie and Winchell finally shake hands. An amiable spoof, with some fun songs by Gordon and Ravel, and pleasant singing by Fay and Haley, in parentheses Clark. Now, Jack Haley was a singer, but a very different kind of singer, and his performance style is better exhibited as the Tin Woodsman, or the Tin Man, in The Wizard of Oz. That's the way he usually sang. He doesn't sing with the rich voice of Buddy Clark, who was a huge radio singer, hit parade singer of the time.
He doesn't get to do much to really use his vaudeville skills almost at all in this movie. He's just kind of a nebbish figure.
He has a great moment when he succumbs to mic fright.
Yes.
That's the big...
with a cartoon mic. That was
exactly
excellent.
Turns into the devil.
Yeah.
It's a real showcase for Jack Haley as the master of the pop-eyed freakout.
He does do a lot of mugging in this movie. Alice Faye is her usual extremely calm and soothing self. You actually believe this is a person who could succeed as a self-help motivator.
We don't get anything of her actual program except her theme song, Wake Up and Live, which is an exhortation to
apparently,
get in there and pitch.
So apparently this was based on, although it seems to be based on in the same sense in which the Clara Bow movie It was based on a magazine article about the subject. This was based on a self-help book by someone by the name of Dorothea Brand. And get this, Dave, while she was serving as associate editor of the American Review in 1936, so the same year Wake Up and Live was published, she married that journal's owner and editor, Seward Collins. Collins was a prominent literary figure in New York and a proponent of an American version of fascism. Brand supported many of these ideas in her articles for the American Review.
Well,
so, from self-help to fascism.
They go together, hand in glove, hand in iron glove. But yeah, you don't get a lot of hints of fascism in this film. Instead, you get Alice Faye just gently encouraging Jack Haley.
I kept thinking of the stuttering boy and the seance-holding therapist at the beginning of Tarkovsky's Mirror. That's kind of the relationship going on here.
I guess so, yeah, but it
Alice
turns
Faye's,
into romance.
She doesn't get to show her maternal side that much in her Tyrone Power and Don Amici movies, of which she made one with Don Amici this same year, but I guess she's really just getting started. Next year will be her big breakthrough year.
She started out, Fox was kind of putting her in as a specialty act, styled like Jean Harlow, basically. She had the Harlow eyebrows. And she was really doing a hot mama act.
Yeah,
but,
no, this is, like, way better.
Yeah, this is more her, obviously.
Very wholesome.
Exactly.
And comforting.
This is a woman who, even when she gets into one of the great noirs of all time, Fallen Angel, you know, she does wind up playing the wholesome character in that film.
Yeah, but she's somehow not boring.
She's terrific.
She kind of just moves in her own time zone.
Really interesting Hollywood figure. She was in all these movies. She got pregnant, started a family in the early to mid 40s, came back for Fallen Angel, and then realized, this is going to disrupt my life too much. And then she didn't retire like so many actresses do. Instead, she moved into the much more congenial radio format with her husband and did that for a long time with Phil Harris.
So, would you say this is more satire or more amiable spoof?
Yeah, I don't think you could necessarily call it a satire in most respects because these important figures from radio are in it. right? And I don't think that they're satirizing themselves. They're just doing what they do on radio anyway, which is make fun of themselves and everybody else.
And pretend to be feuding.
Right, exactly.
For
that
publicity, for fun and shits and giggles and publicity.
It's a huge element, and everyone knew it was just goofing around, right? Everyone knew Jack Benny and Fred Allen were actually friends, but they just lashed out at each other every week.
This is sort of like a fan fiction. Like, what if there actually were something to this pretend rivalry? Although even here, it's more playful than anything.
Well, it is, yeah, and they express their love for each other at the end. Or anyway, Ben Burney expresses his love for Walter Winchell.
Yeah, they're a little double act at the end there.
But radio, we can't overstate how important radio was in the 1930s and into the 1940s for Americans.
Yeah, and Walter Winchell was a very unique figure within that.
Well, he certainly was. But just in general, people went to a lot of movies, but they listened to even more radio. This was their constant companion when they were at home. I am really interested in OTR, as they say, but I haven't heard nearly enough of the programs that are actually out there. There's a surprising amount of material that you can sift through.
I'm not surprised.
Some of it is lost, unfortunately, and sometimes the ones that I want to hear the most are gone, like Robert Benchley's radio program. There's just nothing of it left. Some of his guest appearances are still out there, but he had his own show, and that's gone. These guys, I haven't really heard Winchell or Burney, but I think there are extant copies of episodes that I'm going to have to check out.
So Winchell had quite a precipitous fall from grace.
Well, certainly his politics went from being okay, in my book, to just dire after World War II.
He was an outspoken anti-Nazi and
New Dealer.
And a New Dealer, but then he just went down a dark and psychopathic path.
To such an extent that he became the inspiration for Burt Lancaster's character in The Sweet Smell of Success.
A power-mad... Well, I don't know about the incest part.
Well, no, that's just added as an extra flourish.
But yes, a power-mad power broker of celebrities who's also a nasty conservative anti-communist.
Yeah, he went full in for McCarthy in the 50s.
Great performance by Burt Lancaster.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
One of his best.
He's nothing like Walter Winchell as we experience him in this movie. Walter Winchell seems to have just been a kind of curmudgeon figure, sort of like Ned Sparks, who plays one of his assistants.
Yeah, and Winchell is very amusing, and so is Ben Burney in this movie, so they're obviously able to do comedy. That's part of their jobs.
That's right.
As public figures. So Winchell got very famous for delivering his column over the radio, as we see him do here.
Yep.
With a very fast-paced style, all his own, and that resonated with a lot of other things going on in American culture at the time and informing the style of early talkies.
Yeah, he's right in sync. He's right there at the inception.
Well, not just early talkies, but 1930s film in general.
Yeah, and 20s pulps as well, right? That staccato style. And 20s Broadway, right? You get Hecht and MacArthur, that's when they're getting started, and they're doing the newspaper comedies on Broadway, and then they make their way onto film as soon as the movies can talk. Early 30s, Warner Brothers certainly is partaking of all of that, and you actually have Blessed Event, where Lee Tracy plays basically a Walter Winchell-style character there in 1932.
Now, back in my 20s, when I was first starting to read film criticism, and I think I'm actually thinking of the His Girl Friday essay in Stanley Cavell's Pursuits of Happiness. It was a shocking thing to venture, outside of an academic book anyway. General interest, general reader film criticism book. It was a shocking thing to venture that Hollywood comedies of the 1930s could be self-reflexive. I think Stan Cavell references that moment in His Girl Friday where Cary Grant's Walter Burns comments that Ralph Bellamy looks like that guy from the movies, Ralph Bellamy.
Right.
When you see a movie like this, a completely unsung musical comedy from the 1930s, you realize how thoroughly steeped in self-reflexiveness Hollywood comedies always were.
And just American popular culture, because this is what radio was like. It was very much about selling you things in a very loud manner and then making fun of selling you things in a very loud manner, right? There, David Letterman making fun of GE owning NBC in the 80s, that wasn't new either. These guys had a ball making fun of their own sponsors. In the movie, Ben Burney's show is sponsored by Red Ribbon Malt, which was basically the same pitch almost, except more ridiculous as Blue Ribbon Malt, which was his real sponsor.
Right.
When you hear some of these other radio programs like Fibber, McGee, and Molly, which was a huge success in the late 30s and 40s, there they play a husband and wife who are on a radio show. So the radio show is about them being on a radio show. The ads are just incorporated into the show as their friend showing up with wax for their floors and stuff and demonstrating it in a really overzealous manner. And they make fun of the fact that he's doing that. And it's all just part of the show.
Right.
And audiences, just run-of-the-mill radio audiences, just loved this stuff.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, that's why capitalism works so well, consumer capitalism.
Because you don't have to take it seriously, but it's serious.
It works anyway. The less serious you take it, the better it works.
Its power over you is that you refuse to believe how powerful it is, like the vampire.
So, as you say, well, I mean, I think the main power of this movie, other than having some charming leads, and that includes Walter Winchell and Ben Burney, as well as Alice Faye and Jack Haley, is that it is absolutely packed to the gills with character actors.
Amazing character actors.
And cameos. And self-reflexive cameos like the mise en abîme of Eddie Anderson's appearance and his references to Fred Allen and
Jack Burney.
Jack Burney, yeah. And also, his first appearance, you think they are actually just going to have him on as an elevator boy, as we saw him a couple of years earlier in Three Men on a Horse, right?
Yeah, now he's starting to get a little more cultural cachet.
Well, yeah, because he started his Jack Benny role as Rochester.
Exactly, and he's going to become even more famous in the years ahead as that relationship deepens. This movie gives you the love team you never knew you wanted to see, which was Patsy Kelly and Ned Sparks.
I found out a little bit more Ned Sparks' background here. A little bit of colorful Ned Sparks biography.
Is sometimes a buggy favorite.
So he was born and grew up in Ontario, but he left home at age 16 and attempted to work as a gold prospector on the Klondike Gold Rush.
In the Yukon.
And then after running out of money, he began performing, billed as a singer of sweet southern songs, costumed in a straw hat, short pants, and bare feet. Then, at age 18, he returned to Canada and briefly attended a Toronto seminary. That's all Wikipedia has to say about that.
He had a brief flirtation with God.
After which he worked for the railroad and in theater in Toronto, because that's what you gotta do if you're working in theater in Toronto. And finally left for New York City. Made a name for himself on Broadway. This is where he developed his deadpan, grumpy character.
I guess he was on Broadway until the talkies hit, right? He probably wouldn't have been very useful to Hollywood during the silent era, because much of it...
He looks pretty funny too.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I've never seen him in a silent film, but he certainly might have been. And Patsy Kelly, most famous, I guess, for her shorts that she did with Thelma Todd, the great Thelma Todd. They were an amazing double act. And Thelma Todd unfortunately died in the mid-1930s, leaving Patsy Kelly without her primary acting partner, but she forged on.
It says here on her Wikipedia page, she became a lifelong friend and personal assistant of Tallulah Bankhead. Does that mean she was a lesbian, Dave?
She certainly was. She made no secret of that.
She ended up working in radio and summer stock after her film career declined, and eventually won a Tony Award, appearing in No No Nanette in 1971.
Amazing. So a great career for Patsy Kelly, and she's very amusing in this film.
Other people who turn up, William Demarest.
Yeah, a very small and early role for William Demarest. I mean, he's not young. I don't think he was ever young, but he's not a name here. He's just playing a character called Attendant, right?
But he's very memorable.
He makes an impact.
Well, he's the one who gives Mike Fright to Jack Haley.
Yeah, he really talks him into screwing up his audition.
And he seems like he's doing this on purpose.
Jack Haley says, does this happen a lot? And he says, 4 out of every 5.
Yeah, he's got this demonic glint in his eye as he tells these stories once he sees the effect it's going to have on Jack Haley. And we also see Joan Davis spazzing out as a Spanish dancer.
Yeah, that was quite memorable. I was not expecting it.
Well, you never do expect a female clown in the movies, do you? So this is one of the Fox novelty acts that they specialize in showing us in their musicals. They don't really have any giant musical talent, so they just get the craziest novelty acts they can find.
Well, they will eventually get some giant musical talents like the Nicholas brothers. I mean, again, they can't really star them because of the white supremacist climate, but they're a step up definitely from the Condos brothers, who are pretty good here.
Oh yeah, I'm still within the range of a novelty act, but much more interesting.
And then, the most famous novelty act of all time, so amazing that she transcends all of it, which is Carmen Miranda.
Right.
The highest paid star in Hollywood, and she never actually starred in a movie, really, right? She just plays a supporting character and occasionally takes over the film and does her songs.
From beginning to end, Fox never ran from the kitsch.
No, they loved it.
No other studio could have produced Shirley Temple, Carmen Miranda, and Marilyn Monroe.
Maybe not.
And Will Rogers.
No, all along that time, they're also giving John Ford the space to do his things, his Americana and Otto Preminger and all kinds of other very austere works of greatness.
Oh yeah, and every now and then Henry King made a
Henry
prestige
King
film.
Every single Henry King movie is reason for celebration.
Well, I don't know about Tender is the Night.
It's pretty good. There are weirdos that we encounter. Etienne Girardot turns up, always welcome in my mind. He is momentarily suspected of being the radio phantom, and that's the plot. That's the MacGuffin here. Everyone's looking to find out who the radio phantom is. And it, of course, is Jack Haley, but he doesn't know it. Nobody knows it except for Alice Faye.
Yes, he does get some good mileage out of that. Here's the phantom! looking around and clapping.
Yeah. Walter Catlett is in this movie. Figure that at least you will know mostly, I'm sure, from Bringing Up Baby.
Oh, of course, I nearly forgot.
This woman ain't got no aunt.
He's a creepy old manager.
Oh, he's very creepy. He's an evil agent. So much nastier than he needs to be, right? He's not only a lech, but he is involved in all kinds of shady underworld activities, and he tries to bribe Walter Winchell, who's the incorruptible, of course. He takes the $100 and puts it in the children's milk fund. That's a heroic moment for Walter Winchell.
Maybe he's the satire in the amiable spoof.
Well, I think the biggest satire, actually, which we do have to mention, is the way that they show us how this radio station's custodial force. They're dressed in paramilitary gear, and they're chewed out constantly by their drill sergeant for, conduct unbecoming to the radio station. Jack Haley takes a lot of abuse.
Oh, that's right. That's true. Although it's at the nightclub that he's nearly forbidden to enter at the end.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of guys like that are trying to stand in his way. But the worst is the guy at the radio station. I mean, he's just dressing people down left and right, barking orders, acting as if people have to take this with the same kind of seriousness that they would take love of country. And that has to be some kind of a joke, I mean, on the radio stations. And of course, Hollywood didn't care about insulting radio. We know that.
Yeah, but radio people are involved in this.
Yeah, well, I guess they didn't care either. Maybe they had some run-ins with these overzealous...
Well, it all depends on who owns the station, doesn't it?
Yeah, I would think so. And this is a fictional station. It's the Federal Broadcasting Company.
So they're taking themselves very seriously. Who knows if their star broadcasters, such as Walter Winchell, are taking them quite as seriously.
No, and we know that there were serious feuds going on between stars and networks, stars and sponsors even more so. One of my favorites that I've read about a lot, because it's one of the radio shows that I've actually heard every extant episode, which is Information Please. Their huge, like really brutal battle with Lucky Strike cigarettes. You can actually hear it on some of the programs near the end of the relationship between the producers and the sponsors. The sponsors start interrupting the program when they're not supposed to, and the quizmaster, Clifton Fadiman, is actually, you can hear it, he's incensed. He hates these people. They would soon break up and bring in Heinz instead, which was a much mellower broadcast sponsor.
Yeah, well, those are the sponsors, but you could imagine that there would also be tensions between the
networks,
the Maverick stars and the big money networks.
Yep.
Who want radio to be taken so seriously.
Yeah, and they just provide the framework, because you have to remember that things were done very differently back then, and even in early TV, the networks, all they did was give you time, right? They didn't actually fund shows in general, and they didn't have any control over the shows.
Well, then who's owning this building and who's owning this security?
Yeah, well, that's what the network had, right? They had the station and the broadcast hookup nationwide.
I think you're supposed to feel like there's some kind of disconnect between, or like a major disconnect between that and the people who actually know what they're doing.
These people have no sense of humor, right? And the radio personalities that we meet, all they are walking senses of humor.
Until, of course, Walter Winchell lost his.
Well, yes. That happened to a lot of people, unfortunately, during the McCarthy period.
That's all McCarthyism really was.
A loss of sense of humor.
America's very own cultural revolution.
Very sad. I don't know if there's a lot more we need to say about this film. It does end happily. Alice Faye, we should mention, I guess we have to talk just a tiny bit more about how amazing she is. She does a great version of There's a Lull in My Life, I guess is the name of the song.
Is that the one where she gets sort of sad?
Sure.
Which you're kind of not expecting given the stupidity of the plot?
Well, yeah, when she's performing, she gets these emotions that, they don't have any outlet in the actual movie, right? Because it's too goofy. There's some good songs in this movie. Never in a Million Years is a terrific song, too. If it was written for this movie, then, Gordon and Ravel really did a great job. And the title song, that one, it's not an immortal song, but it's fun. Wake Up and Live.
Sure.
But yeah, Alice Faye is going to get better showcases later on, obviously. In Old Chicago.
Well, I think we have some of them scheduled.
Yeah, we do. So you're going to be hearing about them from us very soon. And I guess that's it for this week, right?
I think so.
Next week, we return to Margaret Sullivan, the acteurist oeuvre review. We'll be talking about The Shining Hour.
Oh my.
A crazy Borzage film with Joan Crawford and Margaret Sullivan.
If you think you know Borzage from having just followed this podcast so far, wait till you see this.
I haven't seen it in a long time, but I remember loving it, and I know you have a different opinion.
Yeah, we'll save it. I don't know how to respond to that movie.
Yeah, well, we'll see how we react this time. It's been so long.
I've seen it twice. So I haven't seen it in probably over 10 years, though.
The other film will be Shop Around the Corner, which we've talked about before in the context of it being the original that You've Got Mail is based on.
It mainly just made me talk about how much I hated You've Got Mail, how stupid it was, and how bourgeoisified it was.
Yeah, well, and I disagreed, even though I agreed with some of that. It certainly is bourgeoisified, but I do like Nora Ephron. That's why we did the episode on her. But here, we're going to focus entirely on Margaret Sullivan in Shop Around the Corner, an all-time great performance.
There might be few movies I love more than Shop Around the Corner. And I don't mean just love like it's a guilty pleasure or something, or it's a cute Hollywood romance. I mean, I admire the fuck out of that movie.
We're going to talk about it at length, no doubt.
See you then.